Welcome to our panel, which is about Armenians in Turkey. Hrag Papazian's presentation. His presentation about Armenians and other Armenians in Turkey.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank the organizers. Third, the Muslim Armenian citizens of Turkey. Whereas some researchers, journalists, and political figures speak of hundreds of thousands or even millions of Muslim Armenians, I personally prefer to abstain from giving such numbers, believing that there is a significant difference between descendants of Islamized Armenians and Muslim Armenians. When I speak of Muslim Armenians, I don't mean all descendants of Islamized Armenians, but rather only those who identify themselves as Armenians, only those who are subjectively and socially Armenian. The Muslim Armenians I encountered come from diverse historical and sociocultural backgrounds. There are those coming from a Sunni environment, those who grew up and lived in Alevi settings such as in Dersim, and thus often have nothing to do with Islam except from being mentioned as one in their identity documents. Some grown up in Kurdish, others in Turkish cultures, some whose ancestors converted during the 1915 genocide, others whose ancestors did so much earlier or later. Because of time restrictions, I cannot deal with the particularities of each of these groups, these subgroups today. What they have in common is the fact that they feel and act as Armenians despite having lived relatively far from the influence of a state or religious institution that claims ownership, organizes, defines, and gives form to Armenian identity, unlike the two other types of Armenians presented above. In the absence of institutional addresses of belonging, such as the Armenian Church or the Armenian state, around which and for which other Armenians' identity is practically manifested on a rather daily basis, being Armenian for these Muslim Armenians is rather a retrospective process. It consists of, first, accepting as a fact that one is Armenian merely because his ancestors were so, and then working to recuperate what was lost of that identity in a continuous policy of annihilation and assimilation. Whereas Christian Armenians and the migrants in Istanbul have institutional entities providing them with both practical and symbolic ideological means for acting and thinking as Armenians, these non-Christian Armenian citizens of Turkey have only a lost past, that of their families, on which to base and build their Armenianness. For instance, when Mehmet's girlfriend was trying to console herself and convince him that he was not Armenian but a Kurd because he was a Muslim and grew in a Kurdish environment, Mehmet replied, I quote, "No, I'm Armenian. My grandfather's name is Megerdich. His father's name is Kevork. We may have changed our religion, but as long as these names do not change, I am Armenian. My race, Irk, is Armenian." Unquote. Another informant explained her motivation towards recuperating what was lost in the following words. Quote, "They took an identity from my family. The Der Garabedian name disappeared. I will take that name once my corporate life is over because I want it to last." Unquote. To illustrate again, this is a screenshot from a Muslim Armenian woman, a young woman living in Sassoon today, from her Facebook photos page. You can see clearly symbols of Islam, Muhammad, the veil, but also symbols of Armenianness, not just the genocide symbols of the pomegranate and those other symbols, but also she trying to write her name in Armenian, a name she has chosen for herself, an Armenian name, Shushan. Finally, evaluating each other's Armenianness. The Christian Armenian citizens of Turkey have special difficulty dealing with the idea of Muslim Armenians. Some, first of all, haven't even heard about the latter's existence still. I quote, "What does Muslim Armenian mean? How does that work?" Muslim Armenian is seen as an ambiguous category. This is easily understandable when we have in mind the identification of Armenianness with membership and allegiance to the Christian Armenian Church, which we have presented in the beginning of this presentation. If being Armenian is conditioned by being part of the Armenian Church and its activities, then how can one be Armenian when he or she has no connection with that world? A man in his 50s put it very bluntly. I quote, "One is Armenian but takes part in the prayers at the mosque. Is this even imaginable? You tell me." Unquote. Others have revolted. Quote, "They will say they're Armenian whenever need be, but stay Muslim at the same time? What kind of hypocrisy is this? Let them make a choice." Unquote. So they see an issue of choice here, either Armenian or Muslim. This and similar lines of thought get to a point where some Christian Armenians even reject to acknowledge the Muslim Armenians as Armenians. I quote, "Let them return to their grandfather's religion and get baptized, only then I could accept them as Armenians," unquote. Muslim Armenians in return do not make judgments regarding the Armenianness of the Christian ones. They argue that being Armenian is a matter of race or nation, of inheritance, rather than of religion, and complain about being marginalized by their Christian counterparts. Finally, as almost no relations exist between the Muslim Armenians and the migrants, the two sides usually do not have much to say about each other, though the migrants, Christians themselves, do also perceive the mere phenomenon of Muslim Armenians as ambiguous and sometimes also unacceptable, but not in a way as extreme as in the case of the local Christian Armenians. And to conclude, without having time to describe and analyze neither the connections and contacts between these two groups, they exist, nor the occasional passing of some individuals from one to another group, I pass to some concluding remarks. In short, the data collected in this research in process reveal that Armenian identity has a diverse range of local interpretations, varying according to the social and historical particularities of its carriers. Furthermore, this diversity can potentially result in internal conflict and mutual expulsion. One might only imagine about other possible local interpretations and definitions in the different corners of this world, and mention the need of further research in this direction in order to have a comprehensive understanding of contemporary Armenian identity. It might be ironic to end with the note that these three different groups of Armenians are perhaps the closest to each other whenever looked at from a fourth and foreign perspective, that of Turkish nationalism. Armenianness for the latter has a totally different definition, of course, that of the national enemy, no matter Christian or not, citizen of Turkey or not. The most obvious commonality between these three types of Armenians is thus the fact of being Armenians in Turkey. Members of all three groups have in fact told me about incidents when they've been insulted or threatened based on their Armenian identity. It is not by coincidence, after all, that probably the only occasions where representatives of all three groups physically unite in time and space are moments when the Armenian, which has otherwise different definitions for each, is under attack. Hrag assassination's annual commemorations, Armenian genocide commemorations, and the late struggle at Camp Armen. Thank you.